Welcome to the stage, our panel for How Religious Freedom Impacts Global Security. Moderator, former National Security Council Senior Advisor on International Religious Freedom, Sarah Macon. Senior Advisor, Human Rights First, Scott Busby. David and Kelly File Fellow, George W. Bush Presidential Center, Nicole Bibbins Sadaka. And Principal Advisor for Global Religious Freedom, U.S. State Department, Mark Walker.
Good afternoon, distinguished panelists, guests, advocates, friends, all of you here gathered. We're grateful for this opportunity to open this plenary session to discuss one of the most vital, yet often underappreciated connections in foreign policy, the nexus between religious freedom and global stability. We live in a world where conflicts, whether interstate, intrastate, or driven by violent extremism, frequently intersect with issues of faith, identity, and belief. Research and evidence consistently show that promoting and protecting freedom of religion or belief is not merely a moral imperative or a human rights concern, it is a practical strategy for conflict prevention, long-term peace, and resilience. Everyone in this room has their own lived experience testifying to the value of religious freedom. In fact, it has been one of the honors of my life to work alongside so many of you in your fight to secure religious freedom for yourselves, your families, and your communities. And that includes Grace, who just did a beautiful job representing her family and her father. You have been the ones who have lived and seen what having religious freedom for a community means and what not having it means. You know that firsthand, religious freedom fosters meaningful dialogue, reduces grievances, bridges divides, and promotes reconciliation, encourages economic development and pluralism. You know that when conscience is respected, people are more likely to resolve differences through conversation rather than coercion, decreasing the likelihood of violence. Conversely, the suppression of religious freedom, whether it be government restrictions, discriminatory laws, or societal hostility, fuels instability on a profound scale. When state or non-state actors deny people the right to believe, worship, or live according to their conscience, it generates deep resentments, marginalizes groups, and creates fertile ground for extremism and terrorism. Persecution doesn't just harm individuals, it erodes trust in institutions, exacerbates divisions, and can escalate into broader insecurity that spills across borders. You are all here today because you know that religious freedom is a stabilizer. And our panel today will explore this dynamic in greater depth. We recognize that while it is not a panacea, advancing and elevating religious freedom must remain a core foreign policy priority and national security imperative. So let's begin. Our first question, Nicole. Drawing from your extensive work at Freedom House and the George W. Bush Institute, by the way, thank you for that video. Yep. That was beautiful. As well as your insights from organizations like the Institute for Economics and Peace, could you share with us some specific data statistics that demonstrate how greater religious freedom correlates with reduced conflict, increased societal peace, and overall global stability?
Excellent, thank you. And thank you for everybody being here. And thank you also to Sam and Katrina just for extraordinary leadership in pulling this group together. I was telling Katrina earlier that when we think about how polarized we are in the world and in our country, when you have a room full of people who fundamentally believe different things, and yet we come together very much around fundamental freedoms and truth and democracy, it gives me a lot of hope for what lies ahead because we have been doing this for so many years. The report that you talked about, the Institute for Economics and Peace, did a great study in which it looked specifically at restrictions on religious freedom and showed a direct correlation. Where there is fewer restrictions on religious freedom, there is greater peace and stability in countries. And there is a straight line on the scattergram that looks specifically, that says the more restrictions there are, the greater instability and the greater challenges that societies face. And a lot of it comes back to the conversation that we had this morning, looking specifically at what can democracies do. It's really important that when we're thinking about religious freedom and national security, that we look at the nature of the regimes that are behind a lot of the suppression of religious freedom that we see. In many cases, they are autocratic governments or violent non-state actors that not only are going after what is the foundational human right that we have and share universally, but it is part of a larger effort of these regimes to consolidate their power. And when you look at the countries that are on the countries of particular concern list, and you look at the countries that our national security agencies are most concerned about, that are a threat to democracies, that are a threat to the global system, they look pretty similar. Because these autocratic regimes have decided that suppressing the voices of those people that they are fearful of and that provide a threat to their complete control of power is part of their strategy. And their strategy is to control, through violence at home and violence abroad, control anything that could be a threat to their regime. So it's really important that we are integrating religious freedom as an integrated part of a national security and foreign policy strategy, because that is the way many of these adversaries are looking at it. And just to your point also, Sarah, many of the individuals and people in this room and communities that face that suppression, we know because it is a fundamental freedom, it is a longing of the human heart. People who believe and are following their conscience will not sit idly by. They will push back. They will go to the streets. They will push for them to be able to live freely. And that is what causes instability at times in a society, because people are choosing to push back on that repression. There are times when that spills into violent action, and there's many, many times, as we all know, that is a regular non-violent action as well. So it's just as important for us to be thinking, when we're thinking about our national security, we're thinking about our foreign policy, that religious freedom is central to both from a human rights perspective, but certainly from a national security perspective.
Thank you, Nicole. Principal Advisor Walker, congratulations on your new post. Round of applause, he deserves it.
Thank you.
He is now serving as President Trump's principal advisor on religious freedom, and I know you have already been busy, and we're all so very grateful that you are in this role. As the president's key advocate for religious freedom, could you share some insight on the specific actions the U.S. government is currently taking to promote and encourage religious freedom on a global scale, and what tools, whether those be diplomatic, economic, or legislative measures, are at its disposal to advance these efforts?
First of all, thank you, Sarah, for the opportunity. Thanks for all your work over the years as well. And to all those that are, whether they're watching via stream or those out here today, I want to say thank you for your great advocacy for people who can't be here, who can't raise their voices. I think it's very important that we look at these issues not just from an activism or an awareness, but to begin to be talking about what are the action steps, what are the concrete things. And I think one of the things with President Trump, he really set the tone in the first administration when he became the first president in history to host a conference at the United Nations primarily on religious liberty. He's followed up with that. In fact, last fall, I believe, and I want to get his words just right, when he was speaking at the UN General Assembly, he said, defend free speech and free expression, and to protect religious liberty, including the most persecuted religion on the planet today, Christianity. Secretary Rubio, who I consider a dear friend, I've known him when I first came into the US Congress back in 2015. Most of you have followed his strong leadership. He is a huge advocate and continues to be for religious expression, for religious liberty across the world. You know, in part in answering this question, in sensing the weight of the responsibility, I was in London at an event sponsored by BYU back in last June or July, and a lady by the name of Baroness Emma Roberts, I believe her name was, and someone that was not shy. In late 80s, she had worked with Margaret Thatcher, and could have been her hatchet lady, I don't know, but she was a tough gal. But she came up, and I just met her. She put her hand right on my chest, and she said, Congressman, she said, do you understand the responsibility that America plays in this role? She said, you have to be the beacon of hope for religious liberty. She said, because you're the only one that has it written in your law. So when I think about the responsibility that this administration has, whether it's our members in the House or the Senate, their friends and colleagues over there, we do have a responsibility to raise our voices, but then to add to those voices specific action steps and measures that we would see and deem necessary. One of the things that we have, one of the tools, if you will, is to be able to put a country on the particular countries of particular concern. Now, for some of you that may be new, some of you that may understand, only the President of the United States and the Secretary of State has the authority to designate a country on the CPC list. There are other lists. There's a special watch list. I won't call it necessarily a precursor in that. But one of the action steps that was crucial over the last 6 or 7 months, Nigeria has really become to the forefront. 70% of all Christians that are martyred come out of the continent of Africa, and 90% of that number have come out of the country, specifically of Nigeria. In fact, we had a great conversation with the governor there today and what they're trying to do and work. So when President Trump took a bold step to list them as a CPC list, it was an action step. It was one that was much needed to be able to tell not only the government, but to the rest of the world that we're monitoring these things. When this kind of egregious behavior and these kind of atrocities are committed, you know, I thought often, I was a pastor and a minister for 16 years before entering into Congress, working in mission trips, working in some interesting places, what it must be like for a young child to wonder which terroristic group may be bursting through their door that night to kidnap them or their parents or even worse. So to be able to have that tool at our disposal, I think is very, very crucial. And not only just to make sure that countries are thinking, well, I'm not on the CPC list, we're off the hook. That's not necessarily so. We saw Secretary Rubio leading most recently restricting some of the visa programs for those individuals, those bad actors that would be utilizing their authority or other things to attack the most vulnerable in our faith communities. Mm-hmm. We've seen individuals already become restricted from being able to come here based on that action by Secretary Rubio. So those are just a couple of examples as we continue to get out there and to engage. As principal advisor in this particular, I guess specifically on my behalf as far as what action role, is to connect with my colleagues there in the House and the Senate and look for policy opportunities, for measures. We've got some great guys over there that are very concerned, authentically concerned about what's happening across the world, not just in Nigeria, and partnering them to push forward legislation that lasts much longer than just a single administration to make sure that we're doing all we can both now and in the future to protect those people across the world that are willing to stand up for their faith.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I've gotten to know you a bit over the past 6-9 months or so, and you are the perfect man for this job, and we are all very grateful that you're there. Yes, I do just want to remind everybody that President Trump in 2018 took the opportunity when then President Buhari from Nigeria visited during a state visit to bring up the issue of the Christians then. And Nigeria did not do anything about it for many years. So, there are so many different tools and ways that this can be addressed, sometimes privately, sometimes publicly, obviously through these other tools. But I'm grateful to see the president continuing to speak about that and make that an issue. And I know we all pray that Nigeria learns their lesson this time and gets the job done this time and fixes the problem. So thank you for your work. Scott, from your decades of experience advancing human rights and religious freedom at the State Department, also White House National Security Council, before me, but shared seats there, and now as Senior Advisor at Human Rights First, could you share your insight on the evidence-based linkages between violations of religious freedom, protections and national security, and effective forms of advocacy, given those linkages? And similarly, maybe you can talk some about countries where you've seen higher levels of religious freedom leading to reduced instability, stronger economic performance, and enhanced long-term security, and maybe what policy implications this holds for the US.
Well, thanks, Sarah, and thanks for having me here. I'm a generalist, human rights generalist, and I advocated on a wide range of issues over the 30-year course of my career, including religious freedom. And I was a civil servant, serving both Republican and Democratic administrations. And I want to reinforce a point that Nicole made, which was I watched both Republicans and Democrats speak to this issue, support this issue. I was actually in the Clinton White House when the IRF Act was passed, in part with the support of the Clinton administration, and I saw how it was implemented under subsequent administrations. So I do think we need to retain that history, remind ourselves of that history. The second cool thing I found about freedom of religion is that it encompasses all the other fundamental freedoms in it. Fundamental freedoms being freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom of association, freedom of expression, freedom of movement. You find all those features within religious freedom. So religious freedom is a barometer, generally, I have found in my career, for how other freedoms are treated. Similarly, I found that where you see restrictions on other fundamental freedoms besides religious freedom, you then also see restrictions on religious freedom. So in my, as Nicole pointed out as well too, I think there is a strong correlation between religious freedom and democracy as well. What I found over the course of my career was that advocacy for religious freedom was most effective when it was effectively integrated into our general human rights advocacy as well as our national security. So it wasn't an issue off on its own, making its own case. It wasn't just Mark going into the Secretary of State's office or the President's office to make the case. It was also the Assistant Secretary for DRL. It was also other national security officials making that case. So I think it's very important to think about linkages among issues, particularly other human rights issues and religious freedom, as well as linkages between national security and religious freedom. Two cases in point that I experienced. One, I was a member of one of the first dialogues we held with the Burmese government. And soon after Burma started to open up, it's unfortunately closed down big time since then, but as it was opening up, they agreed to have a human rights dialogue. And one of the most effective things about that dialogue was we managed to persuade a uniformed Department of Defense official to join us on the delegation to make the case for human rights and particularly religious freedom there. As any of you who know Burma know that the religious freedom there, issues there are profound, whether it's the Rohingya, whether it's Karen Christians, those are significant issues. And having that uniform national security official there on our delegation, we could tell got the other side to pay greater attention. So that's one thing that has to happen.
That's a great example.
The other case that I remember, I did a lot of human rights dialogues and advocacy for human rights and for religious freedom in Vietnam. And there too, we sought to integrate religious freedom into the whole basket of issues that we were advocating with the Vietnamese government. Moreover, we managed to link those issues to both trade issues as well as national security issues. So getting those other agencies and other officials to be part of the team, if you will, in advocating for religious freedom is absolutely key. The last point I want to make, given the integration of religious freedom with other human rights, is the importance of our international treaties that commit us to protecting religious freedom globally. International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, as well as others. And we at Human Rights First have undertaken a specific effort to try to encourage governments around the world to respect these treaties, to adhere to these treaties. And if anyone wants to sign on to our joint letter urging governments to do that, we would welcome it. Please, you can look for me afterwards.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Scott. We've got a few more minutes, and so I thought I would ask a question for you all to respond to. In your collective experience advocating for religious freedom, how would you describe the inherent vulnerabilities of autocratic regimes when it comes to allowing religious liberty? And specifically, why does religious freedom often serve as an Achilles heel for autocrats, potentially undermining their control through moral authority, community mobilization, all kinds of ways? But why is it their Achilles heel? How have you seen that?
I'd be happy to jump in on that. I think when you look at many of the autocratic regimes around the world, they are trying to ensure that they hold tightly to power, that there is no threat from any group that is assembling independently, that is thinking independently, or that is challenging their thinking. That's why they go after oppositionists very quickly. That's why they go after unionists very quickly. But there's something unique about faith communities. They hold as an inherent part something much higher than any government, than any administration, than any one individual who chooses to take hold of power. And that's an inherent threat to an autocratic regime, because these are people, and you heard it from Grace, and you heard it how her father is navigating a horrible, horrible, unjust detention by thinking of something which is far bigger than his personal status right now and the government that has unjustly imprisoned him. And that is a threat. I think we have an opportunity to flip the script on many of these autocrats and show that communities of faith are actually the stabilizing force in many, many countries, because they are focused on what is most important: worship, or coming together and doing service, or contributing to their community. It's an opportunity to do that, but it's also an opportunity for us to ensure that autocrats are not getting away with denying that fundamental freedom as part of their control of power.
So this is kind of the lightning round. So
Yes, sir.
as
Yes.
a former pastor and politician, those are foreign to me, but nevertheless, we'll do what we can here. Wonderful answer, by the way. You know, the biggest threat to these autocrats, if you will, is whether we fundamentally believe something that changes the whole dynamic. And it's simply this: do we believe that our rights come from God Almighty, our Creator, or do we believe they come from man, from an autocrat, from a dictator, from a government? And if we believe genuinely that our rights come from our Creator, there is nothing more appalling, nothing more threatening to these autocrats. Because what it does, it collectively brings us together to lock arms, to be willing to be bold in pushing back. There is no greater cause than standing up for our faith. There is no greater cause for advocating for those who cannot or are pressed to the place in an autocracy that they don't have the ability to be able to do that. So that's why I think it's so important that our government leads and continues to honor our founding documents that clearly states that our rights do indeed come from our Creator, because then they cannot be limited by man. You can't have some autocrat come in and basically say, well, you're no longer allowed to express your faith. You're no allowed to sing your songs, to quote your scripture, to quote your books. That is what I believe is fundamentally allows us to be able to build the most strength and to be able to have the most success pushing back collectively, is understanding indeed where our rights do come from.
Right.
I would quickly say one basic point. Autocracies are inherently fragile. Why is that? They lack the consent of their people. And when a government lacks, or a regime lacks the consent of its people, it is always inherently fragile. It's always subject to quickly changing when the autocrat has screwed up, as is often the case.
Right.
We saw that in the former Soviet Union. We've seen it in a number of other cases. So I think it's incumbent on this community, as well as the wider human rights and democracy community, to think in a forward way about, okay, when China falls, when North Korea falls, hard to predict when that will happen, we need to put in place in advance both the principles and the people who can take over when those regimes collapse.
I'd like to take a personal point of privilege and mention something to you, but before I do, to your point, sir, I think I've been asked so many times by other faith communities why I support them, right? I happen to be a Christian, that's my personal faith, but I have worked so closely with my Uyghur friends, some of whom have become like family to me. My dear friend Ziba, whose mother has been in prison for 7 years, has a 20-year sentence by the CCP. I fight for her and her family all the time. The Yazidi men and women that I met in Iraq and became so close to. And often people have asked, why do you fight for these other faiths? You're a Christian. And I think the power and the strength in believing that we are all children of God, regardless of who that God is, right? And we are all image bearers. And that's why we love and support each other, right? So that is an important point, and one that I hope we don't all miss. It's why we support and are there for each other. With regard to this question in particular and this sort of Achilles heel, I would encourage you all to watch a film called A Faith Under Siege. It's a documentary film about what Vladimir Putin has done to particularly evangelical and Protestant communities inside of occupied Ukraine. They have targeted them, and there's a reason for that. And I think the panelists all just described what that reason is. And I'd say about 15, 20 minutes into the film, there's a very eloquent and wonderful pastor who says, you know, why is Putin so scared of us? Why does he hate us? And it's because we have one authority, and it's not him, it's Jesus Christ. So I'd encourage you all to watch that. I think it really outlines what we've just described. Again, it's called A Faith Under Siege. I want to thank you all so much for your time today, for using your background, your experience to have this conversation. And thank you all for being here. God bless you and your work. And we look forward to seeing you all after this.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.